Nic, you did say you're a political analyst, not an economist, but I do want to ask you some financial questions just from a political standpoint. I want to start with what these developments of the e-tolling, where it puts us as South Africa when it comes to how the global economy looks at us, because some of the arguments that have gone out is that what has happened so far could deter foreign investors coming into South Africa, and others say actually it's a good show of South Africa's democracy.
Like with many of these things, I suspect both of those are true. South Africa has, according to Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address and a range of government statements, South Africa is planning an infrastructure rollout program that is going to be funded to the tune of 1 trillion rand over the next 8 years, not all from government sources. And in fact, the funding model is importantly established by the e-tolling, the user pays fees of the e-tolling system. So having it thrown out by court, in court, but also the tensions around it in the lead-up, raises a real question about how that program is going to be funded, and I suppose in some people's mind whether the program itself is going to happen. It's important for a range of reasons. It's important for all the obvious reasons for South Africans, but it's also important for fund managers who are taking bets on where to put their money in investment stocks that are going to benefit from the growth of infrastructure, or consumer stocks. And it puts it's a very strong driver of the focus of government budgeting, public finances, where the emphasis is going to be on consumption or on investment. And the attempts by Pravin Gordhan to move away from consumption towards investment spending is definitely affected by the decision in the North Gauteng High Court.
Nic, I want to pick your brain a little bit here, because sometimes, I mean, the whole argument has really been cost, where people that are, or organizations that are opposing this, saying that it's going to be really heavy on the South African consumers themselves saying that it's going to be really heavy on them, and then the government saying, then, you know, we are going to have this huge deficit when it comes to where the money is going to come from to fund the infrastructure. But isn't the real issue here also been that the South African citizens, or people living in this country, feeling as though this was sort of like a top-down decision and that people weren't consulted properly?
I think it's correct to separate the two issues. There is no question in my mind that SANRAL, despite taking the thing to NEDLAC, and in fact COSATU declared a dispute at NEDLAC against this process, they didn't persuade the South African consumers in Gauteng, the ones who would be carrying the burden of this, that it was the right thing to do or that it was necessary. I mean, I personally think, I mean, these things are really complex, but I think user pays and infrastructure is the most efficient way of allocating the resources. The guys who are driving on those roads should be the ones who are paying for them, rather than the general tax, pile being used to fund it. And I think that was the model that they were exploring, and more importantly, the lenders lent on that basis. They assessed their risk of repayment on the basis of the e-tolling happening. So I think it's an important precedent, and I think the lenders are going to be saying, hang on, that the borrower is not reliable and the laws are not tightly in place. However, at the same time, the court ruling and the responsiveness of the judge to public pressure and the kind of democracy at play in the whole process was a huge victory for South Africa. Public opinion got the thing turned on its head. It's not always, public opinion is not always right. And obviously, I mean, sitting here in Cape Town, it might be I'm driven by this. I don't think public opinion was right in this process. But I think in an arrogant way, without proper consultation, both SANRAL and government shoved this down the consumers, the users' throats in Gauteng and got their comeuppance. I think it was personally the right thing to do. I think it's the right way to have proceeded. But they didn't sell it. They didn't win it in the minds of the people who are ultimately going to have to pay those costs. And they're high costs. There's no question about it. They're exceptionally high costs.
Nic, what do you think SANRAL or the government could have done differently to get the buy-in then? If people like you feel that the people that are living in Gauteng should pay for these tolls, what could have been done differently to get the buy-in?
I'm not as absolute as saying, you know, I shouldn't pay, they should pay, they're using those roads. It's not as absolute as that, I have to confess. There is, you know, I use roads that I don't have to toll that are not tolled in the same way as those Gauteng roads. And so I have indirectly a benefit that they are going to lose. But I think the most efficient form of allocating resources and like these is to get the users to pay for them. I think basically it was partly a selling job. It was partly going to the consumers and persuading people that you now have you're going to have a beautiful road. Those roads were a nightmare to drive on up until 4 years,
Nic,
3 years ago.
I want to cut you. I want to come in there.
The upgrade. Sorry,
Nic, I want to come in there because I don't think there has been so much of an argument of that infrastructure is not needed. The argument has been the cost on the consumer, and some of the economists that have come out have also raised the question of transparency. So the argument has never been that South Africa does not need this infrastructure development. So let's talk to that. Let's talk a little bit about whether people believe enough in the transparency in this issue, and whether they believe that they should be paying for this, having paid for so many other things, and what has been done to those monies.
That's clearly part of the driver. Is we pay our taxes, we see government ministers abusing the system, we see tenderpreneurial activities, we see a kind of feeding frenzy, looting the state. We see this throughout, unfortunately, throughout our political class. And I think that this is definitely a sign of public anger and disgust at not the state of public finances per se, but where the money's going. You want more money from us, but in fact you have squandered or looted the money that you've taken out of our tax base. Now, it's an overstatement. It's not as clear as that. There's sectors of the state and government and the public service that are doing excellently, and people are getting a bang for their buck. So I'm not surprised that this is being driven by the lack of accountability and the failure to sell the project, but, and this for me is crucial, it doesn't mean it was not the right thing to do in the first place. I think it's a better way of funding that kind of public infrastructure. It didn't work because of the general levels of corruption in government, and certainly the general perceptions about corruption in government, and the profound failure of SANRAL and the Department of Transport to engage adequately in a public consultation process. It was never going to be an easy sell. At some point, the ANC and government was going to have to say, take it or leave it. This is the way. We've sweetened it with the 6 billion that are coming out of the general tax base. We've softened the blow, and now you've got to have to step up to it. But it looked to me like the accountability issues were so profound, the lack of trust issues are so profound that was not going to sell. So it had become an unviable project for that reason.
Nic, I want to ask you, I want to move, because this e-toll process is probably, if it doesn't go through, it's probably going to impact quite a number of things. But looking at where it stands right now, and looking at where that would mean for the economy, could we be able to start talking about what this could mean for public sector wage increases or negotiations? Could we link that to this particular topic?
You see, I would link it. I think if you look at Pravin Gordhan's budget, it was extraordinarily tight. The pressure on government finances are higher than they've been in at least 10 years. And the margins, there's very little margin for error. The budget only worked because of over a 3-year period, essentially a flat increase, a zero increase ultimately for public sector workers, which is the major part of government expense. Higher than, it's a significant portion of non-interest government spending. We are entering the strike season right now. The big test is COSATU feels itself to have just won a major victory. And we can discuss separately, if there's time, of why COSATU sees this as a victory, because it's more complicated than it looks. But they're certainly going to go into the public sector strike season with a lot of vigor. And can the Treasury hold the line? If the Treasury can't hold the line on this, add the 20 billion rand that they've had to come up with that was not budgeted for to bail out the SANRAL project, because the lenders have to be paid. There's no question of that. And this is one of the things I wasn't sure of. I'm assuming this is a government guaranteed loan, and therefore takes on the rating, the risk rating of the government, not just of SANRAL.
Nic,
we have a situation.
I'm so sorry to cut you. I would really like to continue with the conversation, but I'm being told we've totally run out of time. We do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.